All the universe, one mighty sign, is shown. God hath myriads of creative acts unknown. None hath seen them, of the races jinn and men. None hath news brought from that realm, far off from kin. Never shall thy mind or reason reach that strand, nor can tongue the king's name utter of that land. I just read to you the Divan of the Lover, written by Ashiq, and I got that off of the website Ottoman Souvenir. My name is Michael Morgan, and today I will be speaking about Turkish poetry and how Turkish poetry has evolved from an ancient form to a modern art. My three main points I'm going to speak on are the origin of Turkish poetry, the evolution of Turkish poetry throughout the years, and lastly, modern Turkish poetry. On the origins of Turkish poetry, I just read to you the oldest known Turkish poem, which was the Divan of the Lover. Now, I said it was written by Ashiq, but the actual author is unknown, and Ashiq just means the lover, because the author of the poem's name was forgotten. Now, we do know that the poem is written for a passion and a love toward not a fellow human, but for the Lord and for nature and for the world. And the author of that poem, that poet, did die in 1332. The first genre of Turkish poetry was heroic epics. My second point I'm going to speak on is how Turkish poetry has evolved over the years. And I have a poster to help me out with that. Like I said, the very first poem was the Divan of the Lover, which is unknown. In the 13th century, Sufi poetry was introduced, which expressed ideas of Sufism, which is a Muslim mystic. In 1332, writer of the Divan of the Lover died. In the 14th century, a pretty monumental year for Turkish poetry, the Ghazal and the Qasaid began. And the Ghazal was a composed series of couplets with a repeated word and a lover singing to their beloved. The Qasaid was a praise subject, and something that I kind of found interesting about it was that it was secular and religious. As well as the Ghazal and the Qasaid started in the 14th century, the Mesnevi has started as well, which was poetry about the Turkish dynasty. In the 17th century, the Mesnevi was finished. In the 19th century, the Ghazal and the Qasaid ends. In 1941 was Movement, a more simplified language, which was introduced with three poets, and they were made in folk poetic forms, and they mainly discussed ideas of an alienation, feeling alienated in the modern Turkish environment. And lastly, in the 20th century, Yahya Kemal Beyatlı was an important figure, an important Turkish poet, and she taught at Istanbul University, which I found very neat. Turkish poetry has really evolved over the years, and it has become more of an art form now. Students and many professors use it at Istanbul University, and it's become more known to the younger generation as not just an older form of art, as it kind of has been introduced in America now, with younger students starting to be more involved in poetry. The Seza, who was a poet, who was a modern poet in the 20th century, and it blended European and Turkish with right-wing Islamic perspectives, which is kind of a contrast, but it blended that. And then I have a quote from Walter Feldman, who was a Turkish poet and was into Turkish literature. And he made this and I found this on a website that documented it on April 10th, 2013. Turkish poetry displays a sophisticated urban civilization with a history of both confronting the West and desiring to assimilate its values, and, on the other hand, a rural culture that remains embedded in the devolving world and vulnerable to modernity. I found that quote very useful, and I thought it was interesting how, in just a sentence, he had summed up Turkish poetry. I have spoke about the origins of Turkish poetry, how Turkish poetry has evolved over the years, and modern Turkish poetry. We have seen an evolution in the Divan of the Lover being written as more traditional toward God and secular, moving on through Turkish poetry written about the Turkish dynasty, and now into an art form written about anything that the poet desires it to be written about. I hope that this has sparked your interest, and if it has, you can head down to the MSSU library, and I was able to find a book on Turkish poetry. And I would like to end it with a Turkish poem. The author is unknown, and I found it on the website Turkish Language Class. You say that you love the rain, but you open your umbrella when it rains. You say that you love the sun, but you find a shadow spot when the sun shines. You say you love the wind, but you close your windows when wind blows. This is why I am afraid. You say that you love me too.